Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. For this lecture, ladies and gentlemen, we'll provide another installment into our series on Mr. Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, going on to chapter 12. So if you haven't gone back and watched 1 through 11, I would highly encourage you to do so, because even though Mr. Machiavelli didn't directly influence the thinking of the founding generation, a lot of the tactics and strategies that he outlines in The Prince have been used by tyrants in the past and likely will be used by tyrants and authoritarians in the future. And oftentimes, just knowing about these strategies is enough to deter tyrants from even trying to employ them because of that outweighed risk of the citizens realizing their potential subjugation and thus making it not worthwhile of trying to practice. So let's go ahead and jump on over to The Prince. Like I said, we're going on to chapter 12, which is summarily titled Different Kinds of Armies and a Consideration of Mercenary Forces. He says, now that I've given a detailed account of the characteristics of the states I set out to talk about, and examined to some extent the reasons for their being powerful or weak and the ways people in the past have tried to take and to hold them, I shall offer a more general discussion of the means of attack and of defense available to each kind of state. We've already said that a ruler's power must be based on solid foundations, otherwise he's bound to fall. And the main foundations of any state, whether it be new or old, or a new territory acquired by an old regime, are good laws and good armed forces. And since you can't have good laws if you don't have good armed forces, while if you have good armed forces, good laws inevitably follow, I'll leave aside a discussion of the law and go straight to the question of the army. Now, the armies a ruler is depending on to defend his state will either be his own, or mercenaries, or auxiliaries, or some combination of these. Mercenaries and auxiliaries are useless and dangerous. If you are counting on mercenaries to defend your state, you will never be stable or secure, because mercenaries are ambitious, undisciplined, disloyal, and they quarrel among themselves. They quarrel, not there. And they quarrel among themselves. Courageous with friends and cowardly with enemies. They have no fear of God and keep no promises. With mercenaries, the only way to delay disaster is to delay the battle. In peacetime, they plunder you, and in wartime, they let the enemy plunder you. Why? Because the only interest they have in you and their only reason for fighting is the meager salary you're paying them. That's not reason enough to make them want to die for you. Sure, they're happy to be your soldiers while you're not at war, but when war comes, they run for it or just disappear. It shouldn't be hard to convince the reader of this, since Italy's present ruin has been caused precisely by a prolonged dependence on mercenaries. It's true that mercenary forces did win some battles and seemed courageous when fighting other mercenaries, but as soon as a foreign army turned up, we saw what they were made of. Charles, King of France, didn't even have to fight. His men just put chalk crosses on the buildings they planned to use as belays. When Savonarola said we brought this on ourselves with our own sins, he was right. Except the sins were not what he was thinking of, but the ones I've been talking about. And because they were our rulers' sins, it was our rulers who paid the price. I'd like to offer a better explanation of why mercenaries are not a good idea. A mercenary commander may or may not be an excellent military leader. If he is, you can't trust him because he will always aspire to power himself, either by attacking you, his paymaster, or by attacking others against your wishes. But if he isn't a capable leader, he'll ruin you anyway. And if someone objects that it hardly matters who commands the army since commanders always behave like this, whether mercenary or no, my response is as follows. Armed forces are always at the service of a hereditary ruler or a republic. A ruler must go in person and act as commander himself. A republic must send its citizens. If it sends a man who turns out to be no good, it must replace him. If he is good, it must keep him in line with laws that prevent him exceeding his brief. Experience shows that only rulers and republics with their own armies make serious progress, while mercenaries bring nothing but trouble. And a republic with a citizen army is less likely to fall victim to a coup than a republic paying for mercenary armies. Rome and Sparta stood for many centuries armed and free. The Swiss are extremely well armed and completely free. One example of the use of mercenaries in ancient times is Carthage. After the first war with Rome, the Carthaginians were almost overthrown by their mercenaries, despite the fact that these men were commanded by Carthaginian citizens. After the death of uh, Epaminondas, the Thebans made Philip of Macedonia commander of their army, and no sooner had he won the war than he stripped them of their freedom. On the death of Filippo Maria Visconti, the Milanese hired Francisco Sforza to fight against the Venetians. Having beaten the Venetians at Caravaggio, Sforza joined forces with them to overthrow his paymasters, the Milanese. When Francesco's father was mercenary commander for Queen Joanna of Naples, he suddenly made off and left her undefended so that she had to put herself into the hands of the King of Aragon or risk losing her kingdom. It's true that in the past, both Venice and Florence did increase their territories with the use of mercenaries, whose commanders did not seize power but actually defended their employers. The fact is that the Florentines were lucky. Various powerful captains were indeed potential threats, but one didn't win his war, while others either found themselves facing strong opposition or turned their ambitions elsewhere. The one who didn't win was Giovanni Acuto, John Hawkwood, and since he lost, we don't know whether he would have been loyal or not. But everyone must admit that, had he won, the Florentines would have been at his mercy. Francesco Sforza had the forces of Braccio da Montone, or I think it's da Montone, against him, and the two commanders kept each other in check. Sforza turned his ambitions to Lombardy, while Braccio went to fight Rome and Naples. But let's remember what happened just a short while ago. Florence took on Paolo Vitelli as military commander, an extremely serious man who had come from nothing to achieve enormous prestige. Had he taken Pisa, for them, you could hardly deny that the Florentines would have been right to hang on to him, because if he had gone over to the enemy, they wouldn't have had a chance. But keeping him would have meant accepting him as their ruler. Turning to the Venetians, we find they fought confidently and successfully when they fought for themselves. At sea, that is, where both nobles and armed commoners showed great courage. But when they began to fight on land, they left these strengths behind and, like other Italian states, hired mercenaries. In the early stages of their expansion on the mainland, they had so little territory and so much prestige, they hardly needed to worry about their mercenary commanders. But when they pushed deeper into the peninsula under the leadership of Carmagnola, they got a taste of the trouble mercenaries bring. They'd seen what a fine commander Carmagnola was, and under his leadership they had defeated the Duke of Milan, so they soon noticed when he lost his enthusiasm for the war. They realized they couldn't win anything else with him because that wasn't what he wanted, but they couldn't fire him either for fear of losing what they had previously won. At which point, the only safe thing to do was to kill him. Later they hired Bartolomeo da Bergamo, Roberto da San Severino, Niccolo Orsini, Count of Pitigliano, and other such mercenary commanders who were always more likely to lose than win. And in fact, at the Battle of Vaila, the Venetians eventually lost in a single day all the gains they had so determinedly accumulated over the past 800 years. The fact is that mercenaries bring only slow, belated, unconvincing victories, then sudden, bewildering defeats. Since these examples all have to do with Italy, which has been dominated by mercenaries for many years, I'd now like to get a broader view of the problem, because if we can trace its origin and developments, it will be easier to find a solution. What we must remember is that over recent centuries, as the empire began to lose its hold in Italy while the Pope increased his temporal power, so the country broke up into smaller states. Many of the larger cities rose up against the local nobles who had needed the emperor's backing to keep control of them. The church supported the rebels to increase its own political influence. In many other towns, private citizens took over as rulers. The result was that which much of Italy, goodness gracious, now controlled by the church and republics, which is to say by people who had no experience of war, leaders began to hire men from outside. The first successful mercenary commander was Alberigo, Zaconio from Romagna. With what they learned from him, Braccia da Monton and Francisco Sforza and others would become arbiters of Italy's destiny. After them came all the other mercenary commanders down to our own times, and the end result of all their genius is that Italy was overrun by Charles, ransacked by Louis, torn apart by Ferdinand, and humiliated by the Swiss. The mercenaries' first tactic was to increase their own importance by playing down the importance of infantry. Having no territory of their own and living on what they got from fighting, they couldn't feed large numbers of infantry, while smaller numbers weren't sufficiently impressive. So, they concentrated on cavalry and were fed and respected with more manageable numbers. Things reached the point where an army of 20,000 would have fewer than 2,000 infantry. Aside from this, the mercenaries did everything possible to avoid hard work and danger. They wouldn't kill each other in combat, but took prisoners, then didn't even ask for a ransom. They wouldn't attack fortifications at night, and they wouldn't leave their own fortifications to attack a besieging army's camp. They didn't dig ditches or build stockades around their camps. In winter, they didn't camp out at all. All these omissions became accepted practice for the simple reason, as I said, that they wanted to steer clear of danger and hard work. Thus, they brought Italy to slavery and humiliation. So that is all to be said in chapter 12. If you have any questions about what was said in chapter 12, maybe questions about what was said in the preceding chapters, or maybe there's a legal topic you'd like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments, because the entire purpose of the Calhoun School of Law is to equip you with the necessary skills and information, such as this, to combat any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and post them down in the comments. Equally, I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, go ahead and let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and until I see y'all in the next lecture for the next topic, I bid you all farewell.